The embers of smoke still clung to the breeze as Vaughn Irwin trudged barefoot across what remained of his family's wheat field. His calloused feet felt each charred stalk, each heated stone, but the physical pain paled against the hollowness in his chest. Behind him, Olivia Vance followed at a respectful distance, clutching a small wooden box to her chest hope, perhaps the only hope left for either of them in the unforgiving Texas summer of 1879. Vaughn didn't turn to acknowledge her presence. There was no need. He'd felt her eyes on him since the moment he'd emerged from his cabin at dawn, watched as he'd surveyed the destruction that had come in the night. The wheat field that should have been golden and swaying was now a black scar on the earth. 3 months of work gone. His boots, his father's boots, burned alongside the barn, his future once again reduced to ashes. "Mr. Irwin," Olivia called, her voice carried by the wind. "Please wait," but Vaughn kept walking. He'd promised himself he wouldn't cry, wouldn't show weakness, not even when the raiders had come in the night with their torches and their vengeance. Not when he'd stood helpless, watching his livelihood burn. And certainly not now, in front of the banker's daughter with her clean dress and unblemished hands. The sun beat down mercilessly on Vaughn's bare head as he reached the edge of his property, where the burned field gave way to the scrubby brush that marked the beginnings of the vast Texan wilderness outside San Angelo. He finally stopped, allowing his shoulders to slump, just for a moment. "Mr. Irwin," Olivia said again, closer now, "my father sent me with something for you." Vaughn turned slowly. At 26, he was hardly old, but the lines etched around his eyes told of hardships that had aged him beyond his years. He looked at Olivia, 20 years old, educated back east, returned to Texas only the previous spring. Her dark hair was pinned neatly beneath a modest hat, her blue dress simple but unmistakably fine. Her eyes, though those weren't the eyes of someone merely delivering a message. There was determination there and something else he couldn't name. "If your father wanted to gloat, he could have come himself," Vaughn said, his voice rough from smoke and lack of sleep. "Or is he too busy claiming more land while honest folks suffer?" Olivia flinched but held her ground. "That's unfair, Mr. Irwin. My father may be many things, but he's not responsible for what happened here." "No," Vaughn let out a bitter laugh. "Your father denied my loan extension last week. Word travels fast in San Angelo. The Bellamy gang heard I was vulnerable, and here we are." He gestured to the blackened landscape behind him. "That's why I've come." Olivia stepped forward and held out the box she'd been carrying. "This isn't from my father. He doesn't know I'm here." Vaughn looked at the box suspiciously but made no move to take it. "It's my mother's savings," Olivia continued. $400, enough to rebuild, to buy new seed." The shock must have shown on Vaughn's face because Olivia quickly added, "It's not charity, Mr. Irwin. It's an investment. I want to be a partner in your farm." "A partner?" Vaughn stared at her in disbelief. "Miss Vance, I don't think you understand what you're saying. This isn't a game. This land is treacherous. It takes everything you have and then demands more." "I understand perfectly," Olivia replied, her chin lifting slightly. "I've spent a year watching my father foreclose on good people because of drought, disease, or just plain bad luck. I've watched him grow rich while families lose everything. I don't want to be part of that legacy." Vaughn studied her face, searching for deceit or naivety, but found only earnest determination. "Why me? Why my farm?" Olivia's gaze fell to his bare feet, then back to his face. "Because you didn't give up. Even without boots, you walked out to face what's left. That kind of strength is worth investing in." Something stirred in Vaughn's chest, not hope, not yet, but perhaps its distant cousin. He took a step toward her. "Your father will disown you if you do this," he warned. Olivia's smile was small but resolute. "Then I better make sure this investment pays off." Vaughn reached for the box, his fingers brushing against hers. "This doesn't make us partners, Miss Vance. Not yet." "Then what does it make us, Mr. Irwin?" He looked back at the devastation behind them, then to the open country ahead. "I reckon it makes us two fools with a lot of work ahead." For the first time since the fire, Vaughn allowed himself to imagine a future rising from the ashes. It wouldn't be easy, nothing in this harsh land ever was. But as Olivia stood before him, offering not just money but her belief in him, Vaughn felt something shift inside, like the earth after a long drought finally receiving rain. We start by getting you some new boots, Olivia said, breaking the silence. A cowboy needs his boots. Despite everything, Vaughn found himself smiling. Is that what I am to you, a cowboy? You're a man standing his ground, Olivia replied. In these parts, that's about the same thing. Together, they turned back toward what remained of Vaughn's homestead. The walk across the burned field felt different this time, each step marking not what was lost, but what might yet be built. The next morning dawned with a clarity that only comes after devastation. Vaughn had spent the night on a makeshift pallet in what remained of his cabin. The fire had claimed the back half, but the front room remained intact, if smoke damaged. He'd risen before the sun, using the well water to wash away the soot that seemed to have worked its way into every pore. By the time the first golden rays touched the scorched earth, Vaughn had already begun clearing debris from what remained of the barn. He'd found an old pair of boots in a chest that had survived the fire, too small and cracked with age, but better than nothing. He had just pried loose a blackened beam when he heard the approach of horses. Vaughn straightened, reaching instinctively for the rifle that was no longer there. Then he saw her. Olivia sat atop a chestnut mare, leading a pack-horse laden with supplies. Behind her rode a man Vaughn recognized as Thomas Hayes, the shopkeeper from town. "Morning, Mr. Irwin," Olivia called out, pulling her horse to a stop. She wore a simple riding dress today, her hair braided practically. "I've brought supplies and an extra pair of hands if you'll have them." Hayes dismounted, nodding respectfully to Vaughn. "Miss Vance can be mighty persuasive when she puts her mind to something." Vaughn approached them, trying to mask his surprise. "I appreciate the sentiment, but I can't pay for those supplies and I won't accept charity." "It's an advance on our partnership," Olivia said firmly, dismounting with practiced ease. "Mr. Hayes has agreed to provide materials on credit against my personal guarantee." Hayes cleared his throat. "I'm taking a risk here, Irwin, but Miss Vance believes in you and this town needs its farmers." Vaughn looked from Hayes to Olivia, understanding dawning. "You're risking a lot, Miss Vance. Your father is in Austin on business for 2 weeks," she finished for him. "By then, I hope to have something to show for our investment." The determination in her eyes was unmistakable, and Vaughn found himself nodding. "All right then, let's unload those supplies." They worked through the morning, clearing debris and salvaging what they could. Hayes proved to be handy with tools, and by midday, they had cleared enough space to begin rebuilding the essential structures. When Hayes departed for town, promising to return with more supplies the following day, Vaughn and Olivia sat in the shade of the lone oak tree that had survived the fire. "You're full of surprises, Miss Vance," Vaughn said, accepting the canteen she offered. Olivia leaned back against the tree trunk. "Most people see only what they expect to see. My father's dutiful daughter, destined for a suitable marriage and a life of hosting dinner parties." "And what do you see for yourself?" Vaughn asked, genuinely curious. Olivia gazed out at the burned field, her expression thoughtful. "Independence, purpose, a life where my worth isn't measured by my father's name or my future husband's status." "Those are dangerous ideas for a woman in these parts," Vaughn said, though there was no judgment in his tone. "They're dangerous everywhere," Olivia replied with a small smile. "That's why I need this partnership to work as much as you do, Mr. Irwin." Vaughn studied her profile, seeing her perhaps clearly for the first time. Not just the banker's daughter, not just a woman with radical ideas, but a person with her own dreams and fears, risking everything on a burned-out farm and a man she barely knew. "Vaughn," he said suddenly. "If we're to be partners, you should call me Vaughn." Her smile widened. "Olivia," she offered in return. The simple exchange felt momentous somehow, a small but significant shift in their relationship. They sat in companionable silence for a few moments before Vaughn spoke again. "The Bellamy gang won't take kindly to us rebuilding," he said, voicing the concern that had lingered since he'd accepted her offer. "They wanted this land, and they're not known for giving up easily." Olivia's expression grew serious. "Why do they want your land specifically?" "There's plenty of unclaimed territory further west." Vaughn hesitated, weighing how much to tell her. "There's a reason I settled here despite the challenges. There's water underground, a lot of it. I've been digging a well to reach it properly. In these parts, that kind of water access is worth killing for." "And my father knows this?" Olivia asked, her voice tight. Vaughn nodded. I believe so. It's why the loan was denied. He's in league with the Bellamy brothers, has been for years. They clear the land of farmers, your father forecloses, and they divide the spoils. Olivia's face paled, but she showed no real surprise. I suspected something like this, she said quietly. It explains too much. They fell silent again, the magnitude of what they were opposing settling heavily between them. Finally, Olivia straightened her shoulders. Then we need to work faster, she said with renewed determination, and we need protection. I lost my rifle in the fire, Vaughn admitted. Then we'll get another, Olivia replied simply. And we'll let it be known in town that this farm has new backing. The Bellamys might risk attacking a lone farmer, but they'll think twice about crossing multiple townspeople. Vaughn couldn't help but be impressed by her strategic thinking. You've given this some thought. I've watched my father operate for years, Olivia said. I know how men like him and the Bellamys think. They prey on isolation and desperation, so we remove both from the equation. As the sun began its westward descent, they returned to work with renewed purpose. By evening, they had cleared enough debris to begin rebuilding the essential structures the next day. As Olivia prepared to return to town, she hesitated by her horse. I'll be back tomorrow with more supplies, she said, and perhaps a few more willing hands. Vaughn nodded, surprised by how quickly he'd come to rely on her presence. I'll keep working here. Be careful, Olivia cautioned. The Bellamys might return. I'll be ready if they do, Vaughn assured her, though they both knew his options for defense were limited. Olivia mounted her horse with a graceful movement. 2 days, she said cryptically. 2 days, Vaughn repeated, puzzled. Give me 2 days to gather what we need, she explained. Then we'll show the Bellamys and my father that this land isn't for the taking. As Vaughn watched her ride away, the setting sun casting her silhouette in gold, he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time, genuine hope. It wasn't just about saving his farm anymore. It was about standing against the corruption that had plagued San Angelo for too long. And somehow, unexpectedly, it was about the determined woman who had walked across a burned field with hope in her hands and fire in her eyes. True to her word, Olivia returned the next day with more supplies and 3 men from town, a blacksmith, a carpenter, and a former ranch hand. Each had their reasons for helping. Debts to Olivia's father they wished to settle indirectly, grudges against the Bellamy gang, or simple community spirit. Whatever their motivations, Vaughn welcomed their assistance gratefully. They worked from dawn until dusk, rebuilding the essential structures first. By nightfall, a basic shelter stood where the barn had been, and repairs to the cabin were underway. Olivia worked alongside them, her fine hands becoming calloused, her face sunburned despite the wide-brimmed hat she wore when the men departed for town. Olivia lingered. I need to show you something, she said, leading Vaughn to her saddlebag. From it, she withdrew a Winchester rifle nearly new. My father's, she explained, handing it to him along with a box of ammunition. He won't miss it until he returns. Vaughn accepted the weapon, testing its weight. This is a fine rifle, Olivia, too fine to be risking on my account. Our account, she corrected him. And it's not the only thing I've procured. From her other saddlebag, she produced a folded document. What's this? Vaughn asked, taking the paper. A copy of the land records for your property, Olivia said, and the surrounding properties. I borrowed them from my father's office. Vaughn unfolded the document, scanning the information by the fading light. These show water rights, he said, understanding dawning, not just for my land but for 3 adjacent properties. Properties my father has foreclosed on in the past 6 months, Olivia added. All connected to the same underground water source you mentioned. He's been creating a monopoly, piece by piece. Vaughn looked up from the document, meeting Olivia's eyes. This is dangerous information to have, Olivia. If your father discovers you took these, he won't, she said with confidence. Not until it's too late, and this gives us leverage. Knowledge is power, my mother always said. As darkness fell completely, Vaughn insisted Olivia return to town. It's not safe for you here, he explained. Not with only half a cabin for shelter and the Bellamys potentially watching. Olivia reluctantly agreed, but before mounting her horse, she placed a hand on Vaughn's arm. Tomorrow, she said, everything changes. The touch of her hand lingered long after she had disappeared into the darkness, a warmth that seemed to spread through Vaughn's entire body. He returned to his half-repaired cabin, Winchester rifle in hand, and settled in for a vigilant night. Morning brought not only Olivia and the workers from the previous day, but also a surprise. Sheriff Marcus Collins, astride his dappled gray horse, accompanied by 2 deputies. "Mr. Irwin," the sheriff greeted, dismounting, "Miss Vance here has been most insistent that I pay you a visit." Vaughn glanced at Olivia, who gave him the slightest nod. "Sheriff," Vaughn acknowledged cautiously. Collins had never been overtly corrupt, but he'd always seemed to look the other way when it came to the Bellamy gang's activities. "Miss Vance has made some concerning allegations," Collins continued. "Claims of arson, intimidation, conspiracy, serious matters." "They're not allegations, Sheriff," Vaughn replied firmly. "They're facts. My farm was deliberately burned by the Bellamy gang, likely at the behest of Roland Vance." The sheriff's eyebrows rose. "That's a bold claim against one of the most prominent men in the county, Mr. Irwin." "It's the truth," Olivia interjected, stepping forward, "and I have evidence." She produced the land records and explained the pattern they revealed. The sheriff listened, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "This doesn't prove your father ordered the burning," Collins said finally, though his tone lacked conviction. "Perhaps not directly," Olivia conceded, "but it establishes motive. And I believe if you were to question some of the men who have lost their land, they might have similar stories to tell about mysterious fires or other accidents preceding my father's foreclosures." The sheriff sighed heavily. "I've heard rumors, of course. But without witnesses willing to testify, you have one now," came a voice from behind them. A man on horseback approached Samuel Porter, whose farm bordered Vaughn's to the east. "Porter," Vaughn acknowledged, surprised. "Thought you'd headed to California after the bank took your place." "Got as far as El Paso," Porter replied, dismounting. "Then heard about your trouble and figured it was time to come back and set things right." He turned to the sheriff. "I saw them, Sheriff. The night my barn caught fire last winter. 3 men, one of them Jack Bellamy for certain. Week later, Vance foreclosed, claimed I couldn't make my payments without my livestock." The sheriff's expression hardened. "That's still not enough to convict, then perhaps this will help," came another voice. Thomas Hayes approached on foot, leading his mule. He carried a ledger under his arm. "Records of payments made by Roland Vance to the Bellamy brothers. Listed as security services, but the dates correspond perfectly with incidents around the county." "Where did you get that?" the sheriff demanded. Hayes looked uncomfortable. "Let's just say Mrs. Vance has been concerned about her husband's business practices for some time. She's been keeping her own records." All eyes turned to Olivia, whose expression revealed nothing. Vaughn realized there were depths to her planning he hadn't suspected. "My mother died last year," Olivia said quietly. "But not before entrusting me with certain information. She wanted justice, Sheriff, so do I." The sheriff took the ledger, flipping through it with a frown. "This changes things," he admitted. "I'll need to investigate further, but I believe I have grounds to question the Bellamy brothers." "They won't come quietly," Vaughn warned. "No," Collins agreed. "They won't, which is why I'm deputizing you, Mr. Irwin, and any other able-bodied man here willing to assist. We'll confront them together." The next hours passed in a flurry of preparation. The sheriff sent one deputy to gather more men from town while the other rode to notify the county judge. Meanwhile, Vaughn, Porter, and the other workers continued rebuilding, aware that the coming confrontation might result in more destruction. Olivia worked alongside them, her determination never faltering despite the danger ahead. When she and Vaughn found themselves alone for a moment, hauling lumber for the cabin repairs, he finally asked the question that had been plaguing him. "Why go to these lengths, Olivia? This isn't just about one farm or one investment. You're risking everything: your relationship with your father, your standing in society, possibly even your safety." Olivia set down her load of lumber, wiping sweat from her brow. "Do you know what my mother's last words to me were?" she asked, her voice soft. Vaughn shook his head. "Don't live in fear as I did," Olivia quoted. "She spent 30 years married to my father, watching him destroy lives, too afraid to speak out because of what she might lose. I promised her I wouldn't make the same mistake." She met Vaughn's gaze directly. "But it's more than that now. Seeing you walk barefoot through those burned fields, refusing to surrender despite everything, it showed me what real courage looks like. I want to be part of building something honest, something good." with someone who understands that some things are worth fighting for. The intensity in her eyes made Vaughn's heart race. He reached out, almost involuntarily, his hand brushing against hers. "Olivia," a shout from the direction of the road interrupted whatever he might have said. They turned to see a cloud of dust approaching riders, at least a dozen, moving fast. "The Bellamys," Vaughn said grimly, reaching for the Winchester. "They must have heard about the sheriff's investigation." "Too soon," Olivia whispered. "The sheriff hasn't returned with reinforcements yet." Vaughn's mind raced through their options. They had perhaps 5 armed men against at least 12. The partially rebuilt cabin offered some cover, but not enough. "The well," he said suddenly. "My new well, it's deep enough to provide cover." He turned to Olivia, his expression grave. "You should ride for town, bring help." Olivia's eyes flashed. "I'm not leaving." "Olivia, no," she cut him off. "I started this and I'll see it through. Besides, there's no time." She was right. The riders were nearly upon them. Vaughn called out to the others, directing them to take defensive positions. Porter and Hayes grabbed rifles, while the blacksmith and carpenter armed themselves with whatever tools were at hand. "Stay close to me," Vaughn told Olivia as they hurried toward the partially excavated well that had been the source of so much trouble. The riders thundered into the yard, dust billowing around them as they reined in their horses. At their head rode James Bellamy, the eldest of the 3 brothers, a scar running from his temple to his jaw. "Irwin," he bellowed. "We got word you've been spreading lies about us to the sheriff." Vaughn stepped forward, rifle ready but not yet aimed. "No lies, Bellamy. Just the truth about who's been burning out farmers on Vance's orders." James Bellamy's eyes narrowed, then widened as he spotted Olivia. Well, the banker's daughter herself. Your pa know you're keeping company with this dirt farmer." "My father's business is precisely what we've been discussing with the sheriff," Olivia replied coolly. "Your arrangement with him specifically?" A murmur ran through the Bellamy gang. One of the younger brothers, Jack, spat on the ground. "She's bluffing, ain't no proof of nothing." "The ledgers say otherwise," Vaughn called out. "And Porter here saw you the night his farm burned. It's over, Bellamy. Sheriff Collins is on his way with a posse to arrest the lot of you." James Bellamy's hand moved toward his holster. "Might be we need to finish what we started then." "Can't arrest us for nothing if there ain't no witnesses left." Vaughn raised his rifle. "Don't try it, Bellamy. There's enough of us here to ensure you won't ride away from this." The tension stretched taut as a bowstring, each side measuring the other, calculating odds. Vaughn could feel Olivia beside him, her breathing steady despite the danger. Then came the sound they'd been hoping for, hoofbeats approaching from the direction of town. The Bellamy gang turned to look, their momentary distraction giving Vaughn and his companions the advantage they needed. "Drop your weapons," came Sheriff Collins's authoritative shout as he crested the rise, a dozen armed townsmen at his back. What happened next unfolded with the chaotic speed of a summer storm. James Bellamy, seeing his advantage lost, made a desperate decision. He drew his pistol with lightning speed, firing at Vaughn. The bullet whistled past Vaughn's ear as he ducked. Return fire erupted from both sides. Vaughn pushed Olivia toward the well for cover, firing the Winchester as he moved. He saw James Bellamy fall from his horse, clutching his shoulder. Jack Bellamy and several others broke away, spurring their horses toward the open country to the west. "After them," Sheriff Collins shouted, and half his posse peeled away in pursuit. The remaining Bellamy gang members, seeing their leaders fallen or fled, threw down their weapons in surrender. Within minutes, the gunfire had ceased, leaving only the ringing echo in Vaughn's ears and the acrid smell of powder in the air. Olivia emerged from cover, her face pale but composed. "Is anyone hurt?" she called. There were injuries, 2 of the Bellamy gang with serious wounds, one of the townsmen with a bullet graze, but miraculously, no one had been killed. As Sheriff Collins and his deputies secured the prisoners, Vaughn found himself standing amid the chaos, Winchester still clutched in his hands, searching for Olivia. He found her kneeling beside James Bellamy, pressing a cloth to his bleeding shoulder. The outlaw glared up at her with hatred. "Your pa will hang for this too," Bellamy growled. "Once I start talking about his orders, good," Olivia replied simply. "Justice should apply to everyone, Mr. Bellamy, even bankers." Vaughn approached them, his respect for Olivia growing as he watched her tend to the man who had tried to kill them moments before. She looked up as his shadow fell across them, and something in her expression made his heart skip. "It's over," he said, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. There would be trials, testimony, the potential return of Roland Vance from Austin to face charges. The rebuilding of the farm was barely begun, but the immediate danger had passed, not over, Olivia said, rising to her feet. Just beginning. As the sheriff's men loaded the wounded outlaws into a wagon, Vaughn finally allowed himself to lower the Winchester. Around them, the partially rebuilt structures stood as testimony to what they'd already accomplished and what still lay ahead. Olivia stepped closer, her hand finding his. "Still want me as a partner, Cowboy?" she asked, the ghost of a smile playing at her lips despite the gravity of all that had occurred. Vaughn looked down at their joined hands, then back to her face smudged with dirt and smoke, more beautiful to him than any society belle could ever be. "Partner," he agreed, his voice rough with emotion, "and maybe something more in time." The days that followed the confrontation with the Bellamy gang were filled with a flurry of activity. Sheriff Collins and his deputies had managed to capture Jack Bellamy and 3 of his men, though several others had escaped into the wilderness. James Bellamy, recovering from his wound in the town jail, had begun talking, detailing the arrangement between his gang and Roland Vance in exchange for leniency. A telegram was sent to Austin, summoning Roland Vance back to San Angelo to answer questions regarding the allegations. Meanwhile, work on Vaughn's farm continued with renewed vigor. Word had spread through the county about the standoff, and farmers who had previously lost land under suspicious circumstances began to come forward with their own stories. Through it all, Olivia remained a constant presence. She divided her time between the farm, where she worked alongside Vaughn and the hired men, and town, where she managed the increasingly complicated legal and financial aspects of their situation. Her knowledge of banking and her access to her father's papers proved invaluable as they built their case. 10 days after the confrontation, Vaughn stood in his newly rebuilt wheat field, surveying the work they had accomplished. The cabin was fully repaired, a new barn stood where the old one had burned, and fresh seeds had been planted in the sections of field that had been cleared and prepared. The deeper well was completed too, tapping into the underground water source that had been the cause of so much trouble. He heard the now familiar sound of Olivia's horse approaching and turned to watch her ride up, her figure silhouetted against the late afternoon sun. She had taken to wearing more practical clothing for farm work, split riding skirts and simple blouses, though she still maintained a certain elegance that marked her upbringing. "Good news," she called as she dismounted, her face alight with triumph. "The judge has issued warrants for my father's arrest, and the bank examiners are reviewing all foreclosures from the past 2 years. Vaughn took the reins of her horse, his fingers brushing against hers in what had become a habitual, comfortable touch. "That is good news. Though I imagine it's difficult for you despite everything." Olivia's expression sobered slightly. "He's still my father," she acknowledged, "but he made his choices and now he must face the consequences." They walked together toward the cabin, leading the horse. "There's more," Olivia continued. "The bank directors have appointed an interim manager until the investigation is complete, and they've agreed to review our proposal." "Our proposal?" Vaughn asked, raising an eyebrow. "For the water cooperative," Olivia explained. "Allowing all the affected farms to share access to the underground water source. I submitted it yesterday." Vaughn stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "You've been busy," he said, unable to keep the admiration from his voice. "When do you sleep?" Olivia laughed, the sound like cool water in the heat. "I'll sleep when the harvest comes in," she said, gesturing to the newly planted field. "Speaking of which, Mr. Hayes delivered the last of the seed we needed. It's in the saddlebag." Vaughn took the heavy bag from her horse, feeling the weight of the seeds, the promise of future growth. As he did, a thought struck him, one that had been forming gradually over the past days. "This cooperative idea," he said slowly, "extending water rights to the neighboring properties. Are you planning to help restore them all?" Olivia met his gaze steadily. Those who want to return, yes. Porter has already expressed interest in reclaiming his land once the bank reverses the foreclosure. The Miller family, too. That's a lot of work, Vaughn observed. More than one woman can manage, even one as capable as yourself. I'm not alone, Olivia replied simply. I have a partner, remember, the word partner hung between them, laden with unspoken meaning. They had been working side by side for nearly 2 weeks now, their initial business arrangement evolving into something neither had anticipated. Moments of shared laughter amid the hard work, lingering glances over evening meals, the casual touches that had become anything but casual. About that partnership, Vaughn said, setting down the bag of seeds. I've been thinking we should discuss the terms more formally. Olivia tilted her head, a hint of wariness entering her expression. Oh, what did you have in mind? Vaughn took a deep breath. You've put in more than money, Olivia. Your knowledge, your connections, your labor. By any fair accounting, you own more than half this farm already. I don't want to take your farm from you, Vaughn, Olivia protested. That was never my intention. I know that, he assured her. What I'm suggesting is a more permanent arrangement, one that makes this truly our farm in every sense. Understanding dawned in Olivia's eyes, a blush coloring her cheeks. Vaughn Irwin, if you're proposing a business merger, you're going about it very strangely. Vaughn stepped closer, his heart pounding in his chest. Not a business merger, he said softly. Though that's part of it. I'm proposing a life together, Olivia, building something that's ours, this farm, the cooperative, a family someday, if you want that too. Olivia's breath caught, her eyes searching his face. It's only been 2 weeks, she whispered, though there was no rejection in her tone. 2 weeks of facing fire, bullets, and your father's wrath together, Vaughn pointed out with a slight smile. I'd say that counts for more than 2 years of ordinary courtship. Olivia laughed, the sound slightly shaky. You haven't even kissed me yet, cowboy. An oversight I intend to correct immediately, Vaughn murmured, closing the remaining distance between them. Their first kiss was tentative, a gentle exploration that quickly deepened as Olivia's arms wound around his neck. Vaughn pulled her closer, the warmth of her body against his feeling like coming home after a long journey. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Vaughn rested his forehead against hers. Is that a yes? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. Olivia smiled up at him, her eyes bright. Yes, she whispered. 1,000 times yes. The sound of approaching horses interrupted their moment. Vaughn reluctantly stepped back, though he kept Olivia's hand in his as they turned to see who was coming. Sheriff Collins and 2 deputies rode into view, accompanying a well-dressed man whose rigid posture and thunderous expression were visible even at a distance. My father, Olivia said quietly, her hand tightening around Vaughn's. He's back from Austin. Vaughn squeezed her hand reassuringly. We knew this was coming, we face it together. Roland Vance dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, his normally composed banker's demeanor cracked by fury. Olivia, he bellowed, what is the meaning of this? I returned to find warrants issued, the bank in turmoil, and you, his gaze flicked contemptuously to Vaughn, then to their joined hands, consorting with this. Farmer, Mr. Vance, Sheriff Collins interjected, his tone officially firm. I've explained the situation to you. These are serious charges, conspiracy, fraud, possibly accessory to arson and attempted murder. Preposterous, Vance spat. The ravings of criminals and my confused daughter. The evidence suggests otherwise, sir, Collins replied. The judge found it compelling enough to issue the warrants. You'll have your day in court, but for now you'll need to come with us. Vance ignored the sheriff, focusing his rage on Olivia. I gave you everything, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Education, security, position in society, and this is how you repay me. By destroying our family name, aligning yourself with these people, Olivia straightened her spine, facing her father without flinching. You taught me about business, father, about securing assets and protecting investments. That's exactly what I'm doing, investing in honest work and a future with a good man rather than schemes and corruption. You foolish girl, Vance snarled. You think playing farm wife will fulfill you? You'll be back within a month, begging for your old life, covered in dirt and regret. That's enough, Vance, Vaughn said quietly but firmly. Your daughter has more courage and integrity than you could understand. She's chosen her path, and it's not yours to dictate anymore." Vance's face contorted with rage. For a moment, it seemed he might lunge at Vaughn, but Sheriff Collins stepped between them. "That's enough," the sheriff said firmly. "Mr. Vance, you're coming with us now. You'll have your chance to speak in court." As the deputies moved to escort Vance back to his horse, he fixed Olivia with a final cold stare. "You are no daughter of mine," he declared. "Everything I planned for you, everything I built, consider it gone." Olivia didn't flinch. "I already have everything I need," she replied steadily. They watched in silence as the sheriff and his deputies escorted Roland Vance away, his rigid back a testament to his unbroken pride despite the circumstances. When they had disappeared from view, Olivia let out a long, shaky breath. "Well," she said with forced lightness, "that's one way to announce our engagement." Vaughn turned to her, searching her face. "Are you all right?" Olivia nodded slowly. "I knew it would happen this way. He's not a man who forgives what he sees as betrayal." She looked up at Vaughn, her eyes clear despite the pain evident in them. "I meant what I said. I have what I need here, with you." Vaughn drew her into his arms, holding her close as the emotional weight of the confrontation finally settled on her shoulders. She didn't cry. Olivia Vance was not given to tears, but he felt the slight trembling of her body against his and tightened his embrace. "We'll build something he could never understand," Vaughn promised softly. "Something honest and good." As the sun began to set over the newly planted fields, casting long shadows across the land they had reclaimed from destruction, Vaughn and Olivia stood together, the barefoot cowboy and the banker's daughter who had followed him with hope in her hands, now building a future neither had imagined possible just 2 weeks before. The harvest season came to San Angelo with golden light and the promise of abundance. 3 months had passed since Roland Vance's arrest, months filled with hard work, legal battles, and the slow, steady rebuilding of not just Vaughn's farm, but the community itself. The water cooperative had become a reality, with Vaughn's deep well serving as the central point from which irrigation channels now extended to neighboring properties. Samuel Porter had reclaimed his land, as had the Miller family and 2 other farmers whose foreclosures had been reversed following the investigation into Roland Vance's dealings. The trial had been the talk of the county, with James Bellamy's testimony proving crucial to the prosecution's case. Roland Vance had been convicted of conspiracy and fraud, sentenced to 8 years in the state penitentiary, a surprisingly harsh sentence for a man of his standing, but one that reflected the changing attitudes toward corruption and the abuse of power. Through it all, Vaughn and Olivia had worked side by side, their partnership deepening into a love that was the subject of much speculation and gossip in San Angelo. The banker's daughter and the barefoot cowboy, as some still called them, though Vaughn now owned several pairs of good boots. On a warm September evening, they stood together at the edge of the wheat field, now tall and golden, ready for harvesting. The setting sun bathed everything in amber light, turning Olivia's dark hair to burnished copper as she leaned against Vaughn's side. "It's beautiful," she said softly, gazing out over the gently waving wheat. "More beautiful than I imagined when we planted it." "Worth every blister and sunburn," Vaughn agreed, his arm around her waist. Tomorrow would bring the harvest, with neighbors coming to help as they had helped others. The barn was ready to receive the grain, the mill in town prepared to process it. Plans were already being made for the next planting, the cycle of growth and renewal that defined life on the land. "The house should be finished by the end of the month," Vaughn said, glancing toward the structure taking shape beyond the cabin. It was larger than the original had been, designed with Olivia's input, a proper home for the family they hoped to build. "Just in time for the wedding," Olivia replied, a smile in her voice. They had set the date for mid-October after the harvest was complete, a simple ceremony but one that the entire community seemed invested in. Vaughn turned to face her fully, still sometimes caught off guard by the depth of feeling she inspired in him. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. "About your father, your former life?" Olivia considered the question seriously, as she did all things. "I miss my mother's piano," she admitted. "And some of my books. But no, Vaughn, no regrets, not about the important things." She had received a letter from her father the previous week, the first communication since his arrest. It had been brief and cold, a formal notification that he had disowned her legally, cutting her off from any inheritance. Olivia had read it once, then fed it to the stove without comment. "We could get you a piano," Vaughn suggested, "for the new house and more books." Olivia laughed, the sound mingling with the rustle of the wheat and the distant calls of birds returning to roost. "Always trying to give me what I want," she teased, "but I already have what I need." She reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the lines that hard work and sun had etched there. "Do you remember that first day, when you walked barefoot through the burned fields?" Vaughn nodded, covering her hand with his own. "Hard to forget, I was at my lowest point. And then there you were, following me with that wooden box and those determined eyes." "I saw something in you that day," Olivia said softly. "A strength that had nothing to do with money or position, the kind of strength that rebuilds from ashes." She gestured to the flourishing farm around them. "Look what we've created, Vaughn, from nothing but burned earth and hope." Vaughn drew her closer, his heart full to bursting. "We're just getting started," he murmured against her hair. "Wait until you see what we build in the next 50 years. Olivia smiled up at him, her eyes reflecting the golden light of the setting sun and the promise of their future. "I can't wait." As darkness began to fall, they walked hand in hand back toward the cabin, the wheat field whispering behind them like a benediction. Tomorrow would bring the harvest, and with it, the tangible fruits of their labor and love. But tonight belonged to them alone, the cowboy who had walked barefoot through burned fields, and the woman who had followed him with hope in her hands. The October wedding day dawned clear and cool, with the kind of crystalline blue sky that seems unique to Texas autumn. In the 3 weeks since the harvest, San Angelo had buzzed with preparations for what many were calling the event of the year, though Vaughn and Olivia had insisted on keeping things relatively simple. The ceremony would take place on their farm, in the newly completed house that stood as a testament to their shared vision. The large front porch had been decorated with autumn wildflowers and ribbons, the work of a committee of town ladies who had taken Olivia under their wing despite her father's disgrace, or perhaps because of it, as many had quietly suffered under Roland Vance's financial tyranny. In what had once been the burned field, now cleared and leveled after the harvest, long tables had been set up for the feast to follow. It seemed half the county had contributed something: smoked meats, pies, preserves, bread, and more arriving steadily throughout the morning. Vaughn stood in what would soon be their bedroom, adjusting the new suit that Hayes had helped him order from San Antonio. It felt strange after months of work clothes, but today of all days demanded something special. A knock at the door preceded Samuel Porter's entrance. The neighboring farmer, who would stand as Vaughn's best man, grinned at the sight of him. "Well, don't you clean up nice," he teased. "Hardly recognize you without a layer of dust." Vaughn chuckled, though his stomach was a knot of anticipation. "How's everything looking out there?" "Coming together fine," Porter assured him. "Though I think every soul within 50 miles is planning to attend." Word spread far and wide about the banker's daughter and the barefoot cowboy. Vaughn shook his head at the nickname that refused to die. "Haven't been barefoot since that first day," he pointed out, gesturing to his polished boots. "Nicknames stick," Porter said with a shrug. "Especially when they're part of a story people like to tell, and folks do love telling your story." Vaughn gives them hope. The thought was humbling. Vaughn had never considered himself any kind of symbol or inspiration. He'd simply been a man fighting for his land, blessed by the unexpected arrival of a remarkable woman who had changed everything. "Is she here?" he asked, unable to keep the eagerness from his voice. By tradition, he hadn't seen Olivia since the previous evening when she'd left to spend the night in town with Martha Hayes, the shopkeeper's wife. Porter nodded. "Arrived about 20 minutes ago. Martha's got her sequestered in the cabin." "And no, you can't peek," he added, seeing the look in Vaughn's eyes. "Bad luck, you know that." Vaughn sighed dramatically. "Fine, but is she happy? Does she seem like a woman having second thoughts?" Porter finished for him, then laughed at Vaughn's alarmed expression. "Relax. She's practically glowing. Asking just as many questions about you, I might add." Relief washed through Vaughn. Not that he'd seriously doubted Olivia's commitment. She was the most decisive, clear-minded person he'd ever met, but the magnitude of what she had given up for their life together sometimes weighed on him. Almost time, Porter said, checking his pocket watch. Sheriff Collins just rode up, and Reverend Wilson's been ready for half an hour. Vaughn took a deep breath, straightening his shoulders. Let's not keep them waiting, then. They descended the stairs of the new house and stepped out onto the porch. The sight that greeted Vaughn momentarily stopped him in his tracks. At least 100 people had gathered in the yard, far more than they had formally invited. Farmers and ranchers, shopkeepers and craftsmen, their wives and children, the community that had come together in the wake of the Bellamy Gang's defeat and Roland Vance's fall from power. Sheriff Collins nodded to Vaughn from his position near the makeshift altar where Reverend Wilson waited. The sheriff had become a friend over the past months, his initial skepticism giving way to genuine respect for what Vaughn and Olivia had accomplished. As Vaughn took his place beside the Reverend, a murmur ran through the crowd. He turned to see Martha Hayes emerging from the cabin, signaling that they were ready to begin. A local fiddler struck up a tune, not the traditional wedding march, but a sweeter, simpler melody that seemed to float on the clear autumn air. And then Olivia appeared, and the world around Vaughn seemed to fade into insignificance. She wore a dress of ivory silk, elegant but not ostentatious, with autumn flowers woven into her dark hair. But it was her expression that caught Vaughn's breath, the radiant certainty in her eyes as she walked toward him, each step bringing them closer to the future they had fought for. Thomas Hayes escorted her, having agreed to give her away in her father's absence. As they reached the altar, Hayes placed Olivia's hand in Vaughn's with a solemnity that acknowledged the honor of his role. "You're beautiful," Vaughn whispered as she took her place beside him. Olivia's smile deepened. "You're not so bad yourself, Cowboy," she whispered back. Reverend Wilson began the ceremony, his voice carrying clearly to the assembled guests. He spoke of commitment and partnership, of building a life together through hardship and joy. Words that held special meaning for a couple who had already faced fire and bullets side by side. When the time came for vows, Vaughn found himself momentarily overwhelmed. The formal phrases seemed inadequate to express what Olivia meant to him, so he added his own. "I promise to walk with you through whatever fields life brings us, burned or fertile, in drought or abundance," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "And to never forget that the greatest treasure I possess is not this land, but your hand in mine." Tears shimmered in Olivia's eyes, though her voice remained clear as she responded with her own adaptation. "I promise to follow where truth and love lead us, with hope not just in my hands but in my heart, to build with you a legacy of honesty and compassion that will outlast both of us." When Reverend Wilson finally pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up from the gathered community seemed to reach the very sky. Vaughn swept Olivia into his arms for a kiss that held both promise and gratitude for the woman she was, for the chance they had taken on each other. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening. Tables groaned under the weight of food, the fiddler was joined by other musicians, and lanterns were lit as darkness fell. Children chased fireflies while their parents danced or gathered in groups to talk and laugh. As twilight deepened into night, Vaughn found himself momentarily alone, watching the festivities from the edge of the gathering. So much had changed in just a few months. From the despair of standing barefoot in a burned field to this, a community reborn, a love found, a future bright with possibility. "Penny for your thoughts, husband," came Olivia's voice as she appeared beside him, slipping her hand into his. "Just thinking how fortunate I am," Vaughn replied, drawing her close. "Not just for you, though that would be enough, but for all of this." He gestured to the celebration, to the land around them, to the house that awaited them. "I never expected any of it, nor did I," Olivia admitted. "When I followed you that day, box in hand, I thought perhaps I was making the biggest mistake of my life." She laughed softly. "Instead, it was the first truly right decision I ever made." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching their friends and neighbors celebrate. Then Olivia spoke again, her tone casually deliberate. "I've been thinking about the North Field." "Oh," Vaughn responded, recognizing her tone. It was the one she used when she had a new idea or project in mind. "We should plant apple trees along the border," she said. "Start an orchard." "For the future." "The future, huh?" Vaughn turned to look at her, noting the particular gleam in her eyes. Any specific reason you're thinking about future fruit harvests, Mrs. Irwin? Olivia's smile was both shy and certain. Perhaps by the time they bear fruit, we'll have someone small to help us gather them. Understanding dawned slowly, then all at once. Olivia, are you saying? She nodded, her eyes shining. Not certain yet, but I suspect by next spring we'll be welcoming more than just new crops. Joy surged through Vaughn with such force that he lifted Olivia off her feet, spinning her in a circle that drew laughing attention from nearby guests. When he set her down, he kept her close, one hand moving instinctively, protectively, to her still flat stomach. A baby, he whispered, the word reverent on his lips. A beginning, Olivia corrected gently. Another chapter in what we're building together. As the stars emerged in the velvet sky above them, Vaughn marveled at how far they had come from that first desperate day. The cowboy who had walked barefoot through burned fields and the woman who had followed with hope in her hands had found something neither had been looking for, a love that could withstand fire and flourish in its aftermath, strong enough to sustain not just themselves, but an entire community. And now, the promise of new life, the ultimate harvest from seeds planted in the ashes of the old. I love you, Olivia Irwin, Vaughn said softly, the words simple but laden with all he could not express. And I love you, she replied, her voice carrying the same depth of feeling. Today, tomorrow, and for all the seasons to come. Around them, the celebration continued, but in that moment, they existed in a world of their own, making a world built on courage, honesty, and the kind of love that transforms not just two lives, but all it touches. Like the newly planted wheat fields surrounding their home, their story was one of resilience and renewal, of beauty emerging from desolation, and of hope rewarded beyond measure. In the years that followed, the story of Vaughn and Olivia Irwin became something of a legend in San Angelo, and beyond the barefoot cowboy and the banker's daughter who had defied convention, corruption, and calamity to build something lasting and true. Their farm flourished, as did the water cooperative that eventually expanded to include a dozen properties, creating an oasis of prosperity in the sometimes harsh Texas landscape. Their first child, a daughter they named Margaret after Olivia's mother, arrived in the spring following their wedding, a strong, vocal baby with her father's determined chin and her mother's quick mind. She was joined 2 years later by a son, Daniel, and eventually by a third child, Elizabeth, completing their family. Roland Vance served his sentence and was released after 6 years, a diminished man who left Texas immediately, reportedly for California. He made no attempt to contact Olivia or meet his grandchildren. The wound of his betrayal and rejection never fully healed for Olivia, but it was cushioned by the family she and Vaughn created, one built on love rather than ambition, on integrity rather than power. The apple orchard Olivia had envisioned on their wedding day became a reality, and as she had predicted, their children helped with the harvests as they grew. The trees stood as a living testament to the faith that had brought them together, the belief that from devastation, new life could emerge stronger and more beautiful than before. On a warm autumn day, much like their wedding day, 15 years after Vaughn had walked barefoot through those burned fields, he and Olivia stood together at the edge of their property, watching their children help with the wheat harvest. Margaret, at 14, was already showing signs of her mother's business acumen, keeping track of the bushels and calculating yields. 12-year-old Daniel had his father's affinity for the land itself, seemingly able to coax crops from even the most stubborn soil. And little Elizabeth, just 9, darted among the workers, offering water and encouragement with irrepressible energy. We did well, Olivia said softly, leaning against Vaughn's side as they watched. The years had been kind to both of them, adding character rather than simply age. Vaughn's dark hair now showed touches of silver at the temples, while fine lines around Olivia's eyes spoke of both laughter and occasional worry. Better than well, Vaughn agreed, his arm around her waist. Though I can't take much credit, you were the one with the vision. Olivia shook her head, a familiar argument between them. You were the foundation, I just added a few embellishments to the structure. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as Samuel Porter's son, now a young man of 20, said something that made Margaret blush. Vaughn frowned slightly, his protective instincts stirring, Don't, Olivia said, noticing his expression. Remember what it was like to be young and smitten. I'm still smitten, Vaughn replied, turning to press a kiss to her temple. And she's too young. For marriage, yes. For a harmless flirtation, she's about the age I was when I first started noticing boys. Olivia's eyes twinkled mischievously, though none of them were half as handsome as a certain barefoot cowboy I met later. Vaughn laughed, the sound still carrying the same warmth that had first drawn Olivia to him. Flatterer. As the sun began its westward descent, casting long shadows across the prosperous farm, Olivia took Vaughn's hand and led him toward a specific spot, the place where they had first stood together on that fateful day, where she had offered him her mother's savings and her own faith in his resilience. 15 years, she said, looking out over what they had built. Sometimes it feels like yesterday and sometimes like another lifetime. Both, I think, Vaughn replied thoughtfully. The man I was then feels distant now, angry, isolated, ready to give up. And the woman I was seems impossibly naive, Olivia added, though I like to think she had good instincts, at least when it came to you. Vaughn turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. The gesture echoed their wedding day, their countless moments of connection over the years. I've never properly thanked you, he said seriously. Olivia tilted her head, puzzled. For what? For following me that day. For seeing something worth saving when all I could see was destruction. For being brave enough to defy everything you knew for something you believed in. His voice roughened with emotion. For our children, our home, our life together. Tears shimmered in Olivia's eyes, catching the golden light of the setting sun. Oh, Vaughn, she whispered, don't you know, I got the better end of that bargain by far. You gave me purpose, partnership, a family built on love rather than obligation. You gave me freedom, ironically, by giving me roots. She reached up to touch his face, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over their years together. We saved each other, I think. And in doing so, saved a little piece of the world too. Around them, the sounds of the harvest continued, the calls of the workers, the laughter of their children, the rustle of wheat being gathered. The evidence of life's abundance, of promises kept and hopes fulfilled. I love you, Olivia Irwin, Vaughn said, the words no less meaningful for having been said thousands of times over their years together. More with each passing day. And I love you, she replied, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. My barefoot cowboy who taught me that the truest path is often the hardest, but always worth the journey. As they walked hand in hand back toward the house they had built together, the setting sun gilded the fields around them, transforming the ordinary into something sacred. From devastation had come renewal, from loss had come abundance, from a desperate gamble had come a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. The cowboy who had walked barefoot through burned fields and the woman who had followed with hope in her hands had found not just each other, but the truest meaning of home, not a place, but a love strong enough to weather any storm, fertile enough to nurture generations, and deep enough to transform not just their own lives, but all they touched. In the gathering twilight, their story continued to unfold, not ended, but ever beginning anew with each season, each challenge, each moment of shared joy. The greatest harvest of all.